One of the hot potato issues in online education has to do with what and how much and what kind of feedback one should provide to the online students. So with that background in mind, I want to quickly review a journal article. It's a journal article looking at students' feedback preferences. So the article is entitled Post-Secondary Online Students' Preferences for Text-Based Instructor Feedback. It's by Joseph Gredler, published in the International Journal of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. Now, Gredler makes a couple of peripheral points. Firstly, in other words, he makes a couple of points that are not central to his own research. They come from his literature review and some of his identified limitations in his study. But they're really, really important. So, number one, he observes that the stronger the student, the more likely they are to pay attention to feedback. And conversely, the weaker the student, the less likely they are to even read, much less heed, feedback. That impacts upon the study because the study was conducted with high-achieving students who were motivated. The second observation that he makes is that instructor feedback can actually undermine learning when students do not perceive its tone and content to be supportive. Staggering thought, right? Feedback provided by an instructor can actually have a negative impact on student learning if the students perceive that the tone and content with which the lecturer is giving them feedback is not supportive. Quite a staggering thought. Now, in the main research body of the article, Gredler makes 5 points. He identifies, four key themes that emerge from his study. Firstly, active students want feedback to improve their writing skills. So this study was about written feedback on essays. And what he finds is that the motivation for most students who are interested in feedback is that they are looking to improve their writing skills. 2, the students prefer constructive, supportive feedback. So this confirms that point that constructive, supportive feedback is positive, but when the tone and the content is not perceived as supportive, motivated by a desire to help the students to learn, it actually has a negative impact. 3, the students prefer clear, detailed feedback. That's really important. I guess it's somewhat obvious, but it's fairly important. And the fourth theme is that students preferred proximal comments, by which he meant that they would rather have a comment in the body of their assignment at the point where it applies than a general sweeping set of comments that come at the end but are not married to specific details in their essay. Now, in addition to that, there was one key point that he made right at the end of the article that I think is absolutely critical. He observed this: students prefer suggestive feedback to directive feedback. In other words, they like content-oriented feedback that's delivered through explorations and questions. They would rather you sort of nudge and probe and ask a question that leads them to think and discover applications and improvements than that you make directive statements about do this, don't do that, etc. So students prefer suggestive to directive feedback. And so there you have Gredler's take on feedback. Strong students want feedback, weaker ones generally don't. Feedback needs to be perceived as supportive, genuinely motivated by a desire to help them learn, otherwise it can actually be counterproductive to learning. They really like suggestive feedback, probing questions and explorations more than directive feedback. And they prefer proximal comments on their essays, in other words, comments at the point where they apply to general comments at the end.